Thank you, Andrew. The floor is yours.
Well, hello, everyone, and thank you so much for the invitation to speak today on this topic. The Global Cement and Concrete Association comprises of company members, and we can see a list of these company members on the next slide, as well as national associations. So on the left-hand side, producers of cementing are from around the world, representing perhaps 80% of production outside China, and we have some key members within China. And on the right-hand side, national and regional association partners responsible for cement and concrete industries in their countries or regions. And we're delighted that one of the most recent partners to join us has been the China Cement Association. The breadth and depth of this membership is really important because when you see the next slide, which is our global roadmap to 2050, the membership that you saw on the previous slide is committed to this pathway. Starting on the left-hand side, in 2020, we published this roadmap in 2021, and the base data was just prior to that, through to getting to net zero, or really to getting to zero by 2050. And you can see the various technology levers on the right-hand side to get to zero. Our sector has no single silver bullet to get there. Our sector also has some chemistry that happens in the kiln, which means that CO2 is emitted as part of the process emissions or the chemistry that happens. So we cannot solve our carbon problem by just using renewable energy. There's pretty much wide agreement, whatever document you'll read, that these are the right levers, and the policy enablers are required to allow the industry to deliver against these levers to get to zero. Ultimately, policy is made at a national level, which is why on the next slide, we've embarked on a process of developing equivalent roadmaps around the world. Green is where they've already been published, blue where they're about to be published, pale blue where we're in the process of developing them. On the right-hand side, you can see that there's roadmap levers, the previous graph that I've shown you, where the CO2 impact of each lever will be presented or forecast. Then there's the policy enablers, what's required in that country to enable the industry and the stakeholders to deliver against it. And finally, in each country, we're trying to identify lighthouse projects that can be first of the kind in that region that demonstrate what is possible. So all of this gives you the context of the carbon accounting that I'm about to move on to, which is obviously a really important part of being able to measure performance and also being able to drive demand for lower carbon products. So if we go on to the next slide, we can just see a document that the Global Cement and Concrete Association has really inherited from our forerunner. We've existed for 6 years, and we essentially have grown up out of an organization that was under the World Business Council for Sustainable Development. And you can see their logo on the bottom left of the report on the right. So this cement, CO2 and energy protocol is based on calculation methods that are compatible with IPCC guidelines. And the 2006 date, it might seem a long time ago, but the documents that our protocol is based on, those reference documents have not been revised since their publication. And so that's the document that we're currently reporting against. You also want to hear about what the progress is. Well, we've initiated a revision of that protocol to align with latest guidelines, including ISO guidelines that you'll see on the next slide, and technological advancements. Back in 2014, I think when that was published, CCUS was far off. We weren't talking about hydrogen. We weren't talking about calcined clay. So the revision to our CO2 and energy protocol will be aligned with the relevant ISO standards and will take into account the new technologies that will get us to zero. This protocol is scope 1 and 2. So separately, we're doing some work on scope 3. We all know the importance of that. So if we go on to the next slide, we've got a process on, apologies. Just a quick update on progress. So if we go on to that slide with those percentage reductions, using the CO2 and energy protocol, we use PwC as a third-party auditor to collect data from cement plants from around the world. They aggregate that data to give us our annual progress in our CO2 emissions, fossil fuel reduction, our energy efficiency in the manufacturing process, and a whole lot of other parameters as well. They're just the three headline ones we often use to communicate what the progress is of the industry. So if you go on to the next slide, you can see that Scope 3 is something that we also want to be able to report on in the future. So we need to have guidance on that, and we're developing that document based on the Greenhouse Gas Protocol Corporate Value Chain Reporting Standard. So we base our documents on essentially overarching documents that set the parameters. And so for all 15 categories of emissions for Scope 3, we'll provide the guidance and essentially the rule book by which cement companies should report their Scope 3 emissions. And we're just releasing that this month to our members to test that, to make sure that it's effective and works. So I've been talking about cement so far. Now, cement is obviously the powder that goes into the concrete. For emerging economies, cement, the powder, is the product that goes onto the construction site, and it's mixed into the wet form, which then hardens on the construction site. In more developed countries, that process of mixing concrete has been industrialized, either in ready-mix plants, and it goes by truck in a wet form to the site, or it's cast in a factory, and in a hard form it goes to site. So both the cement powder in emerging economies and the concrete product in emerging and in developed economies is what goes on to the project sites. So let's go on to the next slide, and we'll see what the story is on concrete. At a global level, the reporting of production emissions is summarized on the left-hand side, and is much less mature than the cement sector. The cement sector's cement powder reporting is much more mature. There's probably, at a ballpark figure, there's one cement plant for every 200 ready-mix plants, where there are ready-mix plants, or there's one cement plant to thousands of production sites. So gathering concrete data is much more difficult, which is why the accounting at production level of concrete is much less mature. So on the left-hand side, we're only just commencing this, and on the left-hand side, we're only collecting very simple parameters. And it's only the CO2 emissions associated with concrete due to the cement that is being collected on the left. Now, I just want to contrast that with the right-hand side. I haven't talked about product at all yet. I'm now going to talk about product on the right-hand side. Up until now, both on concrete, on this slide, production, and in the previous slides on cement, I've only ever talked about production level reporting. Now on the right-hand side, at product reporting, there are mature standards which define how you develop what's called an environmental product declaration. And this accounts for all the input constituents, all the processes, all the outputs. And it also collects data to do with the performance of the product. So it is far more detailed at product level than at production level. And the reason it can be like this is because at product level, only very few products, relatively speaking, are having an EPD produced on them. That level of detail by the industry has only been going into on a small amount of products. So diagrammatically on the next slide, I just want to show this contrast. I've done it again. I forgot the ISO standards. EPDs are all based on ISO standards. So on the right-hand side, we've got EPDs. And on the next slide, we'll see all the ISO standards that are relevant for both cement and concrete. They are a slight difference. On the top, we refer to them as international standards. They're actually the European suite, which is used basically internationally. And on the bottom left is a North American suite of documents as well. These are the ISO standards. These are the rule books for how you produce an environmental product declaration. And just to give an indication of the maturity of this, we as a GCCA, for the producer members and actually for non-members as well, have an EPD tool where it makes it very straightforward, an online software tool that takes the complex rules in these ISO standards, has it in the background in the software. The companies can put in their parameters for their product and they can produce an EPD. So we're making it very cost effective for the EPDs to be produced for both cement and concrete. If we go on to the next slide, we'll see in diagrammatic form what I'm trying to say about the difference between product and production. Now, the carbon accounting for product and production, it needs to be congruent. It needs to be complementary, but actually it can't be identical. It can't yet. You can see these arrows on both these diagrams are coming closer together. In time, it probably will be identical. But at the moment, it's not. The level of detail on the left-hand side, you can see that the product EPDs can be much more detailed. They are already scope 3, whereas at production level for cement, we're only just now developing the scope 3 guidance. And for concrete, we're even further away at production level. On the right-hand side, you can see that the coverage is much higher for production than it is for product EPD. So you can see that they're an inverse of each other. And it's for this reason that we cannot have identical accounting standards. If we were to try and make EPD standards identical to production standards, we would have to dumb down the detail on the left-hand side. We'd have to take out really valuable detail for the product EPD, and there wouldn't be much sense in that. And on the right-hand side, actually, it's very difficult to get the volume up on product EPDs. It's getting in the right direction, but there are some countries as yet who are really just exploring EPDs. So if we go on to the next slide, how does all this how does this EPD work get used at product level? So very helpful with the IEA definitions for low and near zero emission production that was published in May 2022. And there's been various work of trying to define what low carbon and near zero or zero cement might be. And I've really chosen this one because this is being adopted as a robust starting point by the IDDI. And it's another key aspect of it is it's looked forward to what the 2050 destination needs to be, the 2050 destination of what is near zero. And that's why they've got this green line. And this is very closely compatible with our roadmap. So the green line isn't at zero, but there's something called recarbonation, or the natural carbon uptake of cement and concrete throughout its whole life cycle, which means that actually, if you add in that effect, you go from this green line down to zero. So this graph is very compatible with the global industry roadmap that all our members have committed to. If we move to the next slide, we can see that this graph on the left, just in the last 4 weeks, has been adopted in Germany on the right-hand side. Now, there's lots of detail on the right-hand side. You'll get all these slides, but the key message here is the graph on the left. It's designed to be able to be adopted by countries and used in order that they can define different carbon intensities of cement. And with those definitions, a country can set their own targets. So the definitions on the left, and even the definitions on the right, as interpreted in Germany, as yet, they don't say what the targets are. But then you can impose a target and say, by a certain date, we want a certain percentage of our product to be in a certain band. So this is the cement story. So let's see what the concrete story might be. We go on to the next slide. So we're developing a proposal for the IDDI, which we would hope would be a robust starting point, or even more than that for them. And if we go on to the next slide, you can see what that looks like. It looks pretty similar, doesn't it, for concrete as for cement? A little bit of detail here. The horizontal axis actually is strength. The horizontal axis for the cement diagram actually was something called the clinker cement ratio. How much pure clinker is in the cement and how much supplementary cementitious material is in the cement, things like fly ash or GGBS. So they look the same shape actually for very different reasons. So don't be fooled by that. The key bit on concrete is that its strength is a differentiator. There's lots of other different performance parameters, how long the concrete might last, or whether the concrete can be used in ground conditions where there might be particularly acidic conditions, various other reasons. But the primary differentiator of the embodied carbon of a concrete is the strength. And so this is a credible, effective, not too complicated way of categorizing concretes and banding these concretes into different CO2 strengths. And we would hope that this definition, this methodology will be adopted by IDDI to enable procurement of product and of low carbon product to have definitions that can be applied together with targets. So the industry and the public sector and the private sector know what the direction of travel is, what the trajectory is on decarbonisation of concrete and cement. What would we like to see next on this? Some really valuable work that colleague speaking next might touch on is just the harmonization of EPD standards. So this graph is based on EPDs, environmental product declarations. Our methodology does allow for different countries interpreting the standards slightly differently. You heard before from me that that the international standards, the European standards, are different from the North American standards. This methodology does allow for that to be taken into account, so that a C in one country is equivalent to a C in another country. So we think we've got that complexity covered, but harmonization of the EPD standards would be a big ask from our sector. I think I'll leave it for now, and I'd be very keen to receive any questions today, or I can be contacted at the Global Cement and Concrete Association at any time. My name's Andrew Minson, and I look forward to your questions.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Minson.